Hello, I'm Mark Baxter. I'm the director at YWAM Jacksonville. My wife and I started the base about 21 years ago, and our focus has been on reaching the unreached. A few years ago, I read a article on a website by Steve Shadrach. I've met Steve before. I consider him one of the premier mobilizers in the world today, and he used a word in that article that I had never seen before. It was the word gobilize. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I find it to be a very strategic strategy. I'll tell you a story about how I really became committed to gobilizing and have been involved in it now for a couple of years. What happened is we were doing a DTS here in Jacksonville and had a man by the name of Prince apply. He was from Ghana but lived some of the time in the U.S., and we accepted him. He came to the school. He was an excellent student, and after the lecture phase, he went to Ghana to do his outreach. About the end of the outreach time, he gave me a call. He was still in Ghana, and he said he would like for me to come and to teach some of the disciple-making movement principles that he had learned during his DTS. He wanted me to teach them to his staff. Well, I told him I'd think about it. Wasn't too serious about going, but I told him I'd think about it. And a couple days later, he called me back, asked me if I'm still thinking about it. I said, yeah. He goes, well, how much is a ticket? So I looked it up online, and they were a little bit expensive. And I told him, well, the next day, money showed up in our account to cover the ticket. I was pretty surprised, and you know what that meant. That meant I'm going to Ghana. He had been very generous and wanted to buy my ticket. And so I headed that way. Actually, it was right during when COVID was at its worst, and I got to New York City on my first attempt, and they turned me away at the gate, said Ghana had changed their policy regarding visas. So I had to fly back to Jacksonville, but I kept trying. I finally got over there, and I met his staff, and as we talked, what they really decided they wanted to do was to have a regular DTS under YWAM Jacksonville there, and with a focus on disciple-making movements. So I agreed to that. I thought it was a good idea, especially I realized his staff were some amazing people. And so I went back over there in June and did some staff training, and then I taught in the first week and gave them the basic principles, the simple principles of disciple making, and had a really good week. I came back home here. You know, I was leading the school, so I was in Ghana a lot during the lecture phase, obviously. And I went back after just a couple weeks, and I was talking to one of the students. His name is Prince. No, his name actually was Isaac. And so I talked to Isaac, and Isaac said, so far we've only been able to get started about 8 churches. And I stopped and I looked at Isaac. I said, what'd you just say? He said, we've started about 8 churches. I said, it's only been going like 2 or 3 weeks. He goes, yeah, I know, but we're trying. I go, no, wait a minute, this is amazing. And so I asked him, I said, how have you been doing that? And he said, you know, this kind of humbled me, his answer. He looked at me with kind of a questioning look, and he said, well, we just been doing what you taught us. I go, wow, imagine that. They've just been going out and doing prayer walks in the community, asking God to lead them to a person of peace, which is a prayer that God does answer because he wants to. And so they would do that. They were abundantly sharing the gospel. They were praying with great fervency. You should hear them pray. It was amazing. And they were just going for it. So by the end of the lecture phase, some of those 8 churches had already started second generation churches. They were at a total of 20 churches. Well, they asked me to come back and do a second school. So we did a second DTS just this past spring. And now that number of churches, it's up to at least 37. I have them working on a gen map right now, a generational map of the churches. first generation, second generation, third, and then fourth. And so they're working on that now. But this all comes back to this concept of gobilizing. Because what I'm basically doing is I'm going to mobilize. I'm going into a Christian area. Accra is pretty much a Christian area. That's good for training. And so these guys are learning the principles, they're putting it into practice, and then they're going to places like northern Ghana, which is primarily Muslim, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and they're going to places like that and doing the same things. They're seeing people come to Jesus in these Muslim areas. I had just got a picture of a small, what we would call a rabbit church of former Muslims in northern Nigeria. And so this idea of gobilizing, I think it's a great strategy. I've seen it to be very effective. I think that an African reaching another African, there are less cultural barriers to overcome than for an American to try to reach a person from northern Ghana. Even though their cultures are a little bit different, it's not nearly the difference as what it would be for an American. So I love the concept of gobilizing. In fact, now we're doing it in Thailand, be going to India in January to do some training, be going to Tunisia in November to do some training, been to the Central African Republic recently to do some training. All of this is with this strategy of gobilizing, training the local people to go into unreached areas that are close to them and begin disciple-making movements. So I love gobilizing. I find it to be a very effective strategy. I plan on being a gobilizer for the rest of my life.